when you're basically addressing the conscious community and speaking on something that I think is long overdue, and that is to have the eldership take their place. And for those who represent this conscious community, this Black Power movement, should be able to fall in line with the elders. And coming from somebody like yourself, who has been a very powerful force in this movement, has been a big voice in this movement, that only makes it that much more powerful. And a lot of people have been, knowing that you're coming on the show, urging me or nudging me to at least bring this up during this topic of conversation, because that is something I think that we all need, and we've all been thinking this, even if we haven't been saying this.
Well, I think that the Black consciousness community in the United States is at a crossroads. And if we're at a crossroads, the entire international Black consciousness community is at a crossroads, because most Black folks in other countries within their conscious communities, they take their lead from us. We're the example. We set the blueprint. And so I think that if we do not get very serious about what we claim to be doing, ultimately our people are going to end up tuning us out for something else, or they're going to end up going back to the church. See, the central contradiction of Black consciousness is that we claim that in order to solve our problems, we have to get our people out of the church. We have to disconnect them from mainstream religion. Well, the Black consciousness movement itself is metamorphosizing into another world religion. I mean, when you look at the structure of the church, the Black conscious community is pretty much operating in that same vein. I mean, what does a preacher do? He talks and collects money. What do the lecturers do? They talk and collect money. The preacher really doesn't do anything above and beyond run his mouth. And that's probably true for 95% of all the speakers in the conscious community too. They don't. Most of them are not involved in any sort of serious undertaking, no sort of serious mission or movement. They might belong to an organization, but is that organization necessarily being progressive or not? So I think the exact same things that we criticize mainstream Christian pastors, we're guilty of as a collective as well. So how do you call the kettle black? How do you call the kettle black when you yourself are also a black kettle? And so I think that Black consciousness has to take a long look in the mirror. One of the biggest differences between Black consciousness today and Black consciousness in the 20th century was 20th century Black consciousness was activism based. You might not agree with Dr. King, you might not agree with Malcolm, you might not agree with Medgar, you might not have agreed with Huey P. Newton, okay, but guess what? You might not agree with Stokely Carmichael or H. Rap Brown, you might not agree with the philosophies, but you still had to support them because they were activists. They did things. They were not just about talking. You didn't just see them running around espousing or intellectually masturbating on different issues. After they got off that stage, they were about feeding the people, clothing the people, teaching the children. They were about more than rhetoric. And today's Black consciousness community is stuck in quicksand because all we are about is rhetoric and information. Black people spend $600 million a year on McDonald's, $2 billion a year on athletic footwear, $4 billion a year on alcohol and booze, $9 billion a year on weed, perm, daycare products. We buy 3 times as many Mercedes-Benzes as white folk, although white folk have 3 times as much wealth as we have. Right now, Christmas, this is the worst economic time of the year for Black people. This year is the worst economic time of the year for Black folks. Why? Because in most major metropolitan cities, Black people are hemorrhaging, literally, giving back to their enemy billions of dollars in the name of Christmas gifts. Philadelphia, $3 billion. Detroit, $5 billion. New York City, $8 billion. Los Angeles, approximately $8 billion. This is how much money we spend for one day. I didn't say million. I said billion. We don't have to worry about who becomes president. With that type of money, you can build your own supermarkets. Right. You can manufacture your own automobiles. You can create your own import-export industry, your own airline, your own schools, your own hospitals. With that type of money, we have no business to be relying on the U.S. government to do a damn thing for us.
Exactly. I mean, in essence, from those numbers, I mean, we're funding our oppression. The 13th Amendment. Yeah, the 13th Amendment says you can only be made slaves again with prisons, which just happened to pop up after the end of the enslavement, the physical bondage. So now the prisons are the new plantations. So when we spend our money with these corporations that invest in private prisons. Basically what we're saying is we need more police on the street. We're giving you more money to build more plantations, and you know who is going to end up in there. So with the wealth that we have, as you spoke about earlier, we actually would be one of the most wealthiest nations if we were to pull it together and have our own industries, our own manufacturing, supporting our own black businesses that we have right now, supporting our own black organizations, grassroots organizations. We could really have our nation within a nation, and we wouldn't have to worry about who's in the presidency. We'd be taking care of our local government at such a rate that what we couldn't control wouldn't even really bother us as much.
Without question, our problem is not resources. We have the intellectual, we have the academics, we have the financial resources. We're a $1 trillion economy. $600 million on McDonald's ain't nothing poor about you. $9 billion on weeds and perms ain't nothing poor about you. $2 million on Timbs and Air Jordans, $2 billion on Timbs and Air Jordans every year. There's absolutely nothing broke about black folks except our psychological commitment to ourselves.
Well, I wanted to ask you this in regards to independent black media specifically, and us being able to shape our own narrative and get out the stories and information that's relevant to us, and also neutralize the improper propaganda, as Khalid Muhammad would put it, that is waged against us, and counter that with proper propaganda. How do you think that independent media can step it up in that regard, and what kind of impact do you think that would have on our people?
The United States government spends over $500 million a year on propaganda. Half the magazines that you purchase in the supermarket are published by the FBI. Half the books that circulate on a yearly basis are published by the FBI and the CIA. America wastes nothing to chance. As Marcus Garvey said, more people have been destroyed by propaganda than have ever been destroyed by open warfare, because propaganda is informational warfare. If you can change a man's mind and make him believe that he can never ever defeat you, you will never have to meet him on the battlefield. If you can convince a man that he would never be able to defeat you, you will never have to see him on the battlefield. So propaganda is extremely important to any people's nationalistic aspirations. And we don't have an effective Pan-Africanist propaganda movement. In fact, I think we need to have a conference. There needs to be a national conference for all blacks in media, so we can come up with, not bourgeois media though, but grassroots media, so we can come up with a Pan-African intelligence network, because as it stands, we are totally dependent upon white information sources to find out the truth about what's going on with our people.